1981. A very good morning to you, Mr. Mayor.
Morning, Dermot.
Some people are asking, just on the issue of the Brixton riots, some people are asking why mark an event that saw 300 police officers ending up in hospital and caused millions of pounds worth of damage?
Well, there is going to be a commemoration today of the events 30 years ago, Dermot, and I think it's quite right that we should look back at what happened then and learn the lessons, remember the lessons of the Brixton riots in 1981, all the things that went into causing those riots, and remember what Lord Scarman had to say about policing, all the mistakes that were made. And I think actually, if you look back at progress in London over the last 30 years, we can be very proud. And I hope that that will be one of the things that people conclude, that there has been a huge amount of progress made in London since the Brixton riots 30 years ago, the Brixton uprisings, or whatever you want to call them. But the critical thing, and the reason why I think it's important to have this kind of event and to look reflectively on what's been achieved, is that you can't ever be complacent about issues like this, and you've got to keep making progress. And if this commemoration spurs thought and helps people to make further progress, then in my view that's a good thing.
I know you're interested in terminology, and I just picked up there, Mr. Mayor, on you calling it Brixton uprising, or whatever people want to call it. I mean, isn't what's happening in Libya an uprising against Colonel Gaddafi's regime? Was it an uprising in Brixton in 1981?
No, in my view, there was a riot, and I think that's what people conventionally call it. Other people call it an uprising or a disturbance or whatever you want to call it, Dermot. All I'm saying is that there was an unfortunate event. Let's put it no more ambitiously than that, shall we? In the life of our city, an unfortunate series of events that were caused by, I think, some poor policing and other issues, and those issues needed to be addressed. And Lord Scarman, I think, came out with a very clear and comprehensive report about some of the things that had gone wrong. And if you look at the history of London since 1981, Dermot, I think there's been a lot of progress, and it's important that we chart that. It's important that we celebrate the achievements of the last 30 years. But as I said just now, you can't be complacent.
You can't be complacent. So do you think, I mean, some saying conditions building again, not necessarily in Brixton, but in any other major city in the UK, unemployment, cuts, suspicion of the police, violence against the police at demonstrations?
Well, obviously, Dermot, I very much hope that that won't be what happens, and I don't think it will be what happens. The critical thing for me is that in tough times, we remember the economic conditions that helped to produce those riots in 1981, and we give young people, 18 to 24-year-olds particularly, the opportunities they need. There's huge scope to give young people in this area, across London, across the country, apprenticeships, work placements, internships of all kinds. Far, far better to get them into a place of work, teach them what it's like to be an employee, than to consign them to a life on benefits. And that is what we're trying to do here in London. That's one of the things we're talking about. We're putting some money into it. I do believe that London businesses, small and large, can do themselves and they can do the community a power of good if they take on young people.
Now you've segued me nicely into this whole question about the banks, because I know you've talked in the past about banks as one of the biggest employers in London. They're not entirely matching up to their obligations to society. On this commission, the interim report, do you think they've got it about right, if we believe what is just in that interim report, that no entire breakup of the banks, but kind of firewalls in there to protect against something like what happened 2 years ago ever happening again?
I'm going to look very carefully at the report, Dermot. It's important that we do get the balance right. Clearly, everybody wants to see a system where you have a firewall, so you stop the crazy situation in which depositors' cash, ordinary people's cash, can be used to speculate with in a kind of international casino in a way that, frankly, jeopardizes the health of the economic system of the planet. That was not a good way forward. If we can sort this out with the reforms that are being proposed, then that will be a good thing in my view.
But do you think, I mean, do you believe the banks when they say, well, if you don't get this right, and on other issues that I know you've spoken up about the higher rate of income tax, about the levy, if we don't get this right, then they can up sticks, they're huge international businesses, they can up sticks and leave London?
Yeah, never forget, Dermot, that London employs hundreds of thousands of people, the country employs hundreds of thousands of people in the financial and banking sector who are not high rollers, they're not on stonking bonuses, they're people who depend for their livelihoods, modest livelihoods, on London's strength as a financial sector. So I don't want to see us, pointlessly machine gunning top bankers in an act of revenge when that could do serious damage to the competitive advantages of the city. That's the only point I'm making. But I'm more than happy to see sensible regulatory reform that stops irresponsible bankers taking people's money and speculating with it in a way that actually risks bringing the world economic system to its knees.
But you do think some of your colleagues in Parliament and some of your colleagues, coalition partners in Parliament, have been overdoing the basher banker side of things?
Well, listen, let's be in no doubt. In 2008, the world experienced a major economic shock, not caused by oil prices, not caused by the trades unions, but caused by the irresponsibility of quite a small number of people in the financial services sector. So, frankly, I understand why people are so angry. All I'm saying is you can't expunge financial services, you can't expunge banking from the way we run our economy. It so happens that London and the UK are very good at it. It brings in huge quantities of cash for the city. It generates jobs and employment for hundreds of thousands of people in this city. We'd be very, very unwise to be too hostile towards financial services per se. We need them in our city.
Just tell me, while I raise the issue, Mr Mayor, of your colleagues in Parliament, coalition partners, what did you make of that interview with the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, where he was talking about crying at music and not being a punchbag, being a human being? As you well know, politics is the school of hard knocks. Do you think the pressure's getting to him?
Well, I didn't see that interview, and I think that, on the whole, it must be very, very tough. The people who seem to be in the firing line today, I notice, Dermot, are not the politicians. It seems to be the poor old journalists who are getting roughed up by other journalists. Have you noticed? Everybody's beating up on the media today, and all I can say about that is it seems that a lot of fire is being directed in on one particular news group. Have you noticed? And I wonder whether it wouldn't be time for everybody, all the proprietors, all the editors, to come clean about what's been going on over the last few years. Can they now assure the public that they have not been involved using the techniques that have been allegedly used by the News of the World? I think it would be a very healthy thing for our democracy if they stepped up to the plate and said that.
I mean, do you think your phone was ever hacked? I mean, given the number of stories and non-political stories about your personal and private life that have appeared in the press?
Sorry, I missed that, Dermot.
Do you think your phone's ever been hacked? We've obviously read a lot about you in the press, and I say not just to do with politics.
I was just thinking there must be lots of people out there who are very, very cross with their agents because their phones haven't been hacked, and there must be loads of people who are demanding evidence from these News of the World transcript to prove that they've actually been in the frame, because otherwise I think they're going to feel that they're not important enough. Any celebrity whose phone has not been hacked should probably sack their agent. Is my strong advice.
But I mean, on the serious point, Mr Johnson, that's overhearing by illegitimate means, of course, private conversations. I mean, in terms of journalistic technique, you wrote an article just last week, didn't you, where you'd overheard a conversation that Tom Baldwin, Ed Miliband's press man, was having on the phone. I mean, you seem to think that it's a fairly legitimate tactic.
Well, I think there's a difference, as far as I understand, the technical issue between overhearing a conversation and actively bugging someone's phone or hacking into their phone. As I think it's a breach of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, is my recollection of the law, Dermot, and that's the problem there.
Okay, difference in the law. Tell me, though, about the police investigation into it. Obviously, you have close interest and oversight of some of the Metropolitan Police's operations. We've had Peter Hain on today saying that, he believes the police have at least been tardy in investigating the whole hacking allegations.
Well, an investigation is going on. Plainly, the police need to get on with it. But as I say, what I would like to see is the entire newspaper industry, what we used to call Fleet Street, and indeed the media generally, have a general, truth and reconciliation commission about all this. That's what we need to have, and I think all the editors and all the proprietors should come forward, put their hands up, say whether they know of any of their reporters or employees who may or may not have been engaged in these practices which have now been exposed at the News of the World. I think it would be a very healthy development.
Okay, have you had a Truth and Reconciliation meeting with Oliver Letwin after dropping him in it by repeating his private conversation with you about people from Sheffield flying on low-cost flights?
I have a very good and close relationship with Oliver, but the key issue there, as I'm sure you will appreciate, Dermot, is that I think, as an issue that I never tire of making clear to my friends and colleagues in government, is that they need to remember that you can't endlessly restrict aviation in London and in the South East. At the moment, we've got a policy of no more flights anywhere ever, or no increase in aviation capacity in the whole of the South East. I don't think that that is realistic. If you look at what's happening to Heathrow, it's running at 99% capacity, Dermot. You've got jobs migrating to France and Germany. Above all, we're not able to send the direct flights to the growing economies of Asia, China and India in the way that, say, Paris, Charles de Gaulle or Frankfurt are. We're losing capacity, and in the end, that is not just bad for the UK aviation sector, it's bad for British business as well. So I'm making the argument about a need for increased aviation capacity in the whole of the South East. It's not an easy argument. People are worried about the CO2 implications, but the critical point I'd make there is that by cancelling the third runway at Heathrow, you've left open the possibility of another 85 million passenger journeys a year, and frankly, I think that could be easily found. You could find space somewhere around London for more capacity to give the London and the South East economy the chance to grow. This is really an argument for growth. Everywhere else in the world is doing it. France is doing it, Germany is doing it, they're doing it in India, they're doing it in Dubai. Those economies are seeing increases in aviation capacity. We have it built into the budgets, into the CO2 budgets, in the sense we've already cancelled the third runway at Heathrow. Let's not do the third runway at Heathrow, but let's come up with a better solution.
OK. Boris Johnson, thank you very much indeed, in the sunshine there in Brixton in South London, the Mayor of London.